strong onboarding and then ongoing training with your team, that's really what's going to separate high performing firms from those that struggle and those that continue to have turnover or, again, poor culture within their practice. So without an onboarding process or really processes in place, you're more likely to experience turnover, inefficiency, burnout, and ultimately all of these things, again, cap or eat away at profitability.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And today I have one of our favorite coaches, a frequent visitor. I think you might as well just take over this podcast, Lori. You're
I
here
was
all the time.
telling others recently, I think I have to take a pause so we don't overwhelm or underwhelm.
So, Lori, welcome to the podcast. So we have Lori Pulvermacher with us today. And Lori and I were having a conversation about 3 ways that we're seeing law firms kind of like wreck their practices, wreck their teams, causing a lot of stress. And I asked Lori to come and talk to us about using the process for onboarding as a competitive advantage. And what are the 7 essential tips or strategies that she's going to share with us on how to improve the onboarding process? But before we get there, I want to kind of back up, Lori, because you and I had this conversation, and it's something I keep seeing, you keep seeing, that we sometimes think of onboarding as its own strategic objective. But the question for you and I is why? Why? What are we seeing in the marketplace? What are we seeing in law firms? What are we seeing happening to teams due to failed onboarding? So I've got one. I know you've got a couple. What do you see from your perspective, coaching and advising law firms? What's happening in the trenches?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with so many law firms, and a big piece of the work that we're doing is supporting them in scalability. And that becomes very difficult without human resources to be able to leverage. And so when we aren't hiring effectively, when we can't retain that talent, we see significant turnover, certainly. And it becomes almost a revolving door. And that's a term that's been used by some of the firms that I've been working with lately on and trying to correct this issue. And the turnover, the revolving door, isn't just a matter of I've hired somebody, now they're gone, now I'm hiring someone else, but it eats away at profitability, it eats away at productivity, and it eats away at the ability to move the needle forward with that scalability or with the objectives of the practice.
Let's stay right there for a second. Because if you're looking to grow your firm, you're trying to build that great practice. You can't grow great practice without great people. And if you don't have a great onboarding process, and you don't understand strategically how onboarding should enhance your growth, then you have a problem. And it's probably a blind spot that a lot of us have because, like myself, I wasn't hired. I didn't have a great onboarding process. I got in the firm that hired me. I walked in, I had a desk, more of a coffee table next to a copy machine in a closet. And that was about my onboarding process. And they started handing me files and research projects. That's about it. So I think a lot of lawyers have never had a formal onboarding process. So I want them to just take a moment and realize that how I got onboarded, which was terrible, how they got onboarded, which more than likely was terrible, is the exact opposite of what we're talking about because you're trying to grow, you're trying to scale. And if you have a no onboarding process or a sloppy process, you can't grow. So that's number 1. What's number 2 for you?
It's a culture killer. If you do have any team members that exist right now that you do want to retain, that are doing well, that maybe didn't have a great onboarding process, but despite that, have been able to really flourish in your practice. Bringing on new team members that aren't able to be well integrated into the team or take on responsibilities. It creates a lot of shifting and reallocation of duties back and forth every time that revolving door turns. And you can take individuals who are legitimately happy, satisfied in their role, and undo that.
Yeah, that's a big one for me too, because I see a new team member comes, makes it maybe 3 to 6 months at the most, and then bails. And then when they leave, all that work then just shifts to the existing team members that were hoping for relief. They were hoping to catch a breath. They were hoping the new member of the team would help, take some pressure off.
Oftentimes, we told them, we just got to get through this, right? We'll hire
Yeah.
this person, and then it's all sunshine and rainbows on the other side of this.
There's
And
sunshine, rainbows, and little bouncy unicorns. Just hang in there. It's going to get better. The person comes and leaves. And then the person that's been sitting there when it's not sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns is going, well, if this person who's kind of cool and pretty interesting came, looked around, and left after 3 to 6 months, why am I still here? Like, why? What's wrong with me? Maybe I need to leave too. And so what happens is the real high performers, the rock stars, start scratching their head, going, maybe this is not a good firm. I thought it was a good firm, but maybe it's not a good firm. So as you as an audience member, I don't care where you're at in the law firm, as a team member, team leader, associate, attorney, junior partner, it doesn't matter. You're bringing somebody into your culture, into your team, and that's really what Lori's here to talk to us about, like how to do this. So Lori, here's the question. Let's get into this. So here's the question. How can a strong onboarding process provide a competitive advantage to a law firm?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, a strong onboarding, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure. It's not a one and done effort, but strong onboarding and then ongoing training with your team. That's really what's going to separate high performing firms from those that struggle and those that continue to have turnover or, again, poor culture within their practice. So without an onboarding process or really processes in place, you're more likely to experience turnover, inefficiency, burnout, and ultimately all of these things again cap or eat away at profitability.
Frustration, lack of confidence. I think a lot of law firms get stuck. And probably the number one thing I hear from the lawyers I work with, or usually managing partners and owners, is I can't find any attorneys. And when they do find the attorneys, they're not doing a great job onboarding them. They're just bringing them in, dropping a ton of work on their desk, and running out the door to whatever they got to do next. So, do you have any statistics or anecdotal evidence or stories that might support a good return on investment for an onboarding process?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal. We're collecting that on a daily basis. And you alluded to it, Steve. It's that hopium that, through osmosis, that this individual will flourish, do well, have a strong impact. But not only that, be immensely loyal to this firm, right? So that's a big frustration, especially when you brought up founding partners and attorneys. We have to recognize that there are generational societal differences with new fledgling attorneys coming into the workspace compared to those that are well established in their career. That could probably be another talking topic altogether, Steve. But to come to your point, one of the organizations I think we can put a lot of trust in with their research is the Society for Human Resource Management, or what's referred to as SHRM. They do a lot of work and studies and research on all aspects of employment, and they contribute a strong onboarding process with improving the hire retention rate by 82% and the productivity of that new hire by 70%. So in a law firm, that is the difference between scalable growth and constant setbacks.
That's actually a difference between profitability and money loss too, right? So I think that's a pretty big statistic. So let's do some work here. Let's just go to strategy one. What's your number one strategy or tip on making your onboarding process competitive, or helping your onboarding process make you competitive? I got that backwards. Sorry.
So to be competitive and effective, Tip number one is we have to start onboarding before that new hire comes in. Onboarding really should be a process and a procedure that we're seeking to develop as part of our organizational initiatives. But you find yourself with an open vacancy and you're currently seeking a candidate, so it starts now, right? Or it starts before you even post for that position. So you have to have a lot of structure and understanding in place before you even acquire that new individual. So again, we won't get into the whole hiring and leading up to that, but before that person starts on day one, we want to make sure that we've given thought to what their acclimation process, their training process is going to be. And we want to make sure that we very clearly defined their role and how they're going to, again, be implemented into the culture and into the specific role that they're filling.
All right, so that's a little crazy, but I'm going to make sure I got this straight. What you're saying is before day one, the position itself has to be not only well defined, but the expectation and onboarding process probably is completed before you start the hiring process. Is that what you're proposing?
I would love to see that, right? So again, we're going to have listeners out there that they're in the throes of this right now, or maybe they just hired someone, they just brought them on. Now is the time, right? It's never too late. Again, in an ideal situation, you've given this some adequate thought, but also keep in mind that this is going to tailor itself depending on the role that you're hiring for. The way in which you onboard an associate attorney versus the way you onboard a legal admin support person are going to be a little bit different. Some of those things are going to be absolutely constant, but then there's going to be differentiations because of their role and their specific responsibilities. So start identifying again, not only the roles and responsibilities, but the culture implementation. What are you doing to integrate them into the team and not just into that position? And again, this is the important part because we are ad hocing this. We are not, we're bringing them in and going, okay, welcome. Can't wait for you to start making an impact. But I'm not giving you any structure on how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what Rose Hutchinson and I've talked about this in her episode, which is we'd really like you to hire way before you need someone. And most law firms are hiring while the house is on fire, and they're handing someone a bucket, and they're like, "So it's just start throwing water. There's no water in the bucket. I don't care. Just start doing something," and that becomes part of the challenge. So, talk to me about strategy two.
So strategy two would be to really build out a 90-day plan then. So this is forcing you to go through the specifics about what are the key elements that I have to consider to effectively onboard and integrate this individual. What are the benchmarks, the milestones? What do I want, them to be able to accomplish? And essentially you're asking yourself, what does success look like? If I hire a new individual within 30 days, what is success? Within 60 days, within 90 days. We use 90 days because it's typically a probationary period where we are still evaluating the correct or right fit of this individual. And then likewise, they may be doing the same with you. So while we try to ensure that we're getting the best fit in the interviewing and hiring process, a lot is revealed after that. And so we can ensure that we're not, delaying the ability for them to have impact by having very clear benchmarks, milestones, and what we want them to be able to take on. Some of this is how autonomous or how self managing they are in some of these activities after a period of time. But this says, I'm going to shape what day one looks like, what week one looks like, and try to provide as much specificity. And I'm going through and identifying where there's shadowing opportunities, what are the team building opportunities, what are the specific areas of training that I need them to complete as well. So this well-structured onboarding process, again, I'm sure there's people listening that go, "Oh, that sounds horrible."
That
Sounds like
sounds
a
like work, Lori. That sounds like work. I'm just going
lot
to
of
say it
work.
sounds like work.
Who's going to
Sounds
do
like
this?
work.
But it really is a vital investment in your firm's future, in the success of this new hire, and also so that your hires feel empowered, supported, and ready to contribute on from day one.
Well, the question, I guess, because I'm thinking about this, and there's a lot of different variables on how you would design this. But I think for me, and you can correct me on this, what does winning look like to both parties at the end of 90 days? So, what does it look like? What does success look like? So, if there are three ways that you could determine what success looks like, that would be something that I would frame out in my mind. Like, what would success look like for both parties? The firm and the new team member, whether it's an associate, admin, what have you. Are there other simple ways or simple questions or simple frameworks that you can pass on to the audience in considering as part of a 90-day onboarding plan?
So just kind of going back to what you mentioned a moment ago, Steve, which is the what are the successes, right? So sometimes it's hard. I work with attorneys. I'm like, well, I don't know. And it's like, okay, well, let's carve this out. So this is doing that advanced work, and considering that because again, we want them to start making impact on day one, and it's not a reality. And even if they come to us with really relevant prior experience, it's different. They're in a different model than what they were in previously. They're in a different legal specialization. So we have to be cognizant of those things and making sure that we're supporting that development. But also, to the degree, in my management experience, I love the philosophy that the more information, more transparent I can be with my team, the more it allows them to self-manage themselves, and more quickly integrate because they know what's expected of them. And so, the other piece of this 90-day plan is that we're not just identifying what we need to figure out today, but they can look beyond this week or this month and kind of have a vision and a roadmap for themselves. And I think that's so important that they know that you've got this figured out, and they can be a part, an active part, and a contributing part of that onboarding experience.
So, lack of clarity by the law firm, in this example, the law firm owner, guarantees lack of clarity for the onboarded new member. And lack of clarity is terrifying to a new person in a new role. If I joined an organization and they just say, do good work, show up on time, those are pretty small benchmarks. But in 90 days to 6 months, they say, well, you haven't met your numbers. I'm going to say, what numbers are you talking about? I've showed up, I've been on time, I've done good work. What numbers are you referencing? Well, your billables or your revenue or this, that, or the other thing. And then you just can't say, well, they should know that. Well, they should know that. No, they don't. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know. You have to kind of clarify them. These are the rules of the game. This is how you're judged for performance. So,
The reality of it is, our leaders, and this isn't unique in the law space by any means, but the more the leader is a technician by training, by nature, the less experience they have with truly managing and motivating individuals and teams, the greater the kind of delta to cross here to identify how to get the information out of my head and not make assumptions. Leaders make so many assumptions, and they also have talked with attorneys who swear they had conversations with team members that never really transpired. They may have transpired internally, they may have transpired through frustration, but Brene Brown is quoted with saying, "Clear is kind." Right? We want to make sure that we are being very clear and in detailing the specifics and the metrics. So that can be another piece. So not everyone has the KPI specifically determined, but this is part of giving them that roadmap.
okay. So, what's strategy 3 or tip 3?
Strategy number 3 would be onboarding as a process and not a one and done, right? So it's more than just training. I've already kind of alluded to this, Steve, but we've got to make sure that we're considering how their experience, just like we do with our clients. When a client comes in for a meeting, what are we doing to create that favorable experience? What are we doing to make them feel special? So what components do you have to elevate the initial introduction of this individual into your practice? It should be something to celebrate. There's a new team member here. We have somebody else to help support us in our objectives. We have somebody else who has committed and said yes to being a part of this dynamic team. So let's celebrate that, right? And then how are we going to integrate them? I can't tell you how many folks, and you said it too, they just come in and here's some cases and go to work. But day one should really be about orientation, about meeting with the other team members, understanding the other roles of the team, understanding the process is not just specific to their role, but to the office. How does the break room work, and how does garbage get taken out, and unlocking and locking and closing up, and all these little nuances of being in a new business or a new building, if you would. for this individual. Sometimes we just completely overlook that, and then months later identify that there's frustrations, but again, they were never really informed. And so, as our team grows, it's important to recognize that this is a culture dynamic. And every time we add a new individual, a new personality, it creates a new dynamic, right? We don't just maintain the culture or the feeling of that team when new folks get implemented. So it's an ongoing implementation and team building process, but it's an ongoing training process also, so that we are not limiting the potential or the opportunity that we have to leverage those team members.
Fantastic. So that leads us to strategy 4.
Those very, very clear expectations, right? So again, we've been talking about this, but tip number 4 really being, again, the clarity of expectations in the activity and responsibilities that we want them to own, right? So in the beginning, I always consider this kind of a ramp up process, right? In the beginning, we're planting seeds, we're supporting them and filling gaps. But then over time, we want them to take more ownership, more management, more responsibility. So we want to make sure, again, we're being very clear in what that looks like. That 90-day onboarding and that ongoing training program are going to be pivotal in this. But it's also the willingness, again, to share, to be vulnerable, to be transparent with our team, and let them know what the objectives and the vision and the goals are that we have for our practice, and how they can support that, where they can fit into that. Most individuals want to be in a supporting capacity. Most individuals want to recognize what their unique role is in the bigger picture of things. And I've talked with many employees over the years that have said, just, I didn't know what I was doing. I just showed up. I did my work. I didn't really know how it mattered. And especially with our younger generations, we're seeing that they want more purpose-driven work and are motivated that way.
What if you can increase your net income by 10% without taking on more work, increasing costs, and without working longer hours? The majority of lawyers are tied to the billable hour as their pricing model. The billable hour is an untapped area for improvement. So as I look at trying to help you, other lawyers, grow their practice and increase their income, we have designed a new virtual workshop called Level Up Your Billable Practice, Unlock Hidden Revenue, and Maximize Your Time. It's happening on February 27th, 2025, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, it's a virtual workshop. You don't have to travel. You don't have to do anything other than protect the time. Now, the good thing about this is not just for you as the practice owner. We've designed this workshop that if you have anyone in your practice, whether it's a team leader, an associate attorney, a paralegal, that bills by the hour, they can come to this workshop and up-level their game to improve their game. Now remember, our goal's modest. We just want to see a 10% improvement out of this workshop. I'm personally leading this workshop because a lot of what I did in my practice, both as a coach and a practitioner, was billable work. My experience is that if you can just do 3 or 4 things to improve a billable practice, you can increase the net income or gross fairly significantly. So think of this as a 5-hour intensive training program for your law firm, an investment of both time and money to improve the outcome of your billable practice. During the workshop, you're going to learn how to capture every billable hour you work. We're going to talk about how to raise rates without losing clients. We're going to talk about best practices, how to improve efficiency, reduce time, and improve cash flow. So if you're a contingency fee lawyer, a fixed price lawyer, this workshop's not for you. This is just designed for lawyers that have a billable element of their practice. So if you got a friend that you would like to recommend that to, that's great. By all means, do it. So if you're ready to stop leaving money on the table or have that leakage that occurs in the billable practice, you can either visit our website or you can register immediately from the link in the show notes, and you can save $100 off of it if you use the following code, podcast100. So let's make 2025 a great year for you by investing in your practice and kicking up that billable hour element. Can you give me an example of how you would encourage someone to set expectations and how those might be kindness in action? Can you think of an example, a practical one?
Yeah, so we talked about the KPIs, but it's also, and this is where again the work has to come back on somebody else. It can't be carried by the new hire alone. So if I'm the managing individual, and usually again this is going to be the founding attorney, if they don't have somebody that's taking on that HR or firm management role, but whomever is in that role is setting meetings with this individual. There is a feedback loop that's happening. We are referencing that 90-day guide and plan, and we are checking the boxes as we go along, and we are identifying whether or not there's friction, there's delays, we're not meeting benchmarks or milestones, and we're recalibrating as a result. So it creates that consistency, and it tells, which is so important from the clarity piece of it, it tells the new hire that when I've said something, when I've implemented something, I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to follow through with it. When we put these onboarding plans in place sometimes, and again, a lot of it is ad hoc, but then we put the burden on the individual to onboard and recognize whether or not they're meeting the benchmarks. It sets the expectation or the indication early on that there's not real follow through, there's not clear communication, they don't really mean what they say. Yeah, they said this, but no one ever followed up with me on this. It's one of the biggest detriments we can do with new hires in the infancy of their onboarding is not have those feedback loops and not be meeting with them frequently enough to check it against the plan.
Can you give me a basic example of something that would be in an onboarding plan? Because I know you've helped a lot of people do this. Something that would be an onboarding plan that you would think that would be incredibly obvious. Like this would be obvious, but something that you're like, that needs to be in there. I know it sounds obvious, but it needs to be in there. Can you give me an example?
Yeah. So in the kind of the obvious category, it would be those specific metrics and role clarification, right? So recently, I'm working with a team, and they've brought on a new associate attorney, and we're 45 days ish into this new hire, and things are going really well. But I always want to question, you know. Yes, they're going well, but how does this measure against what's the next benchmark and make sure that we're looking at that? And so with this particular new hire, it's the ability to take on X number of consultations solo by a certain time, right? So 45 days in, by day 60, they'd like to see this attorney specifically taking on the initial consults without shadowing, without oversight of those, and being able to close. And so we're setting KPIs for number of consults conducted and a close ratio for measured success.
Yeah, that's terrific. So that helps me a lot. So as you're listening to this, I know that sometimes Lori and I may talk in vague terminology, but I want you to start thinking about practical things. So Lori, that worked really well. Like give me a measurement of something that you think should be so obvious. So that's a great example, a really good example. So what's your next strategy?
Train early and reap the benefits of doing so. There are long-term benefits in investing in the training. And again, this is, avoiding the ad hoc, avoiding the assumption that they know certain things. And again, this happens most often I see when someone says, well, they were a paralegal at another firm. They should know these things. Didn't they do this stuff at their last firm? And I said, that's a great question for them, not for me. So understanding where we can, fill the gaps and complete that. But again, this has to be part of the long run plan of the success and implementation of this individual. Oftentimes, again, we look at the onboarding, get them ramped up, get them doing what I need them to do in that role, and then just set it and forget it. So we have to have a training process that we come back to, and we have to identify what are future needs that the business has that this person could fill. What are future hires that we could perhaps promote from within and replace their role with? So again, this is strategy. This is the on the business type of work and consideration that we have to extract ourselves from the daily whirlwind to give attention to.
Well, this is a great one. So this is one I always struggled with. So I'm just going to kind of babble here for a second. If you're looking at a firm and they've got, let's just say, 4 to 6 team members. How much time per week would you recommend be set aside for invested in for ongoing training? So an average week, let's just say 40 hours. How much time would you say I'd like to see this law firm investing in firm-wide training, X many hours or X hour? Or what would you like to see? What would be ideal for you?
So there's actually, I don't have the stat or the reference, but in work that I did previously, we had information that indicated there's different roles that you play when you're a firm or business owner, and so we refer to it as these different hats that you wear, and there's different hats. And one of those is the trainer role, one of those is the manager role, one of those is the supervisor role. It sounds like those are all kind of just the same thing, but with different titles, but they're very different classifications of the type of work and what you're looking for and what you're measuring. And in the training role, it's a significant amount of time in the infancy of that onboarding. And the reality of it is, this gets neglected. I've got attorneys who have brought on new hires while they're in the midst of a trial. They've brought on new hires when they're leaving or won't be there because they're off on vacation, and haven't given the thought to how much vested time. And I know it seems, crazy to think you're going to block days off on your calendar, but in the infancy, you have to have dedicated time. This is most important work, right?
Yeah, so
But
let's stay there for a second. All right,
okay.
just stay right there for a second. This would be the blind spot for me because the day I got sworn into the bar, like the day after I got sworn in like 4:30 in the afternoon. At 9 o'clock the next morning in a courthouse I'd never been to, with a case I'd never heard of, with witnesses I'd never met, for a client I'd never met. I was doing a 2.5 to 3 hour hearing. Now, that's how that law firm operated. That's how I practiced for the beginning part of my career. So I just need to slow down for a moment because most of us gray haired lawyers, or even some of us not so gray haired lawyers, grew up in practices where there was no onboarding. There was no strategic thinking. It was just practice chaos. So as you're listening to this as an audience member, you're probably having the same, whiplash experience I'm having, which is, hey, look, that's not how I learned it. And that's not how I was treated. And that's not how. Now, to Lori's point, I just want you guys to get this, all right? To Lori's point, at the end of 2 years, I was offered partnership in this firm and I turned it down because there's no way in the world I want to be partners with these people because the way they ran their practice was they just was a group of knuckleheads. So, if you're listening, you have to contrast how you were trained was probably terrible.
And you have to be self-aware that that's not the right approach. Just because that was your experience doesn't mean it should be somebody else's
Well,
experience.
but that's it. But there's a really weird, and I've had this conversation with attorneys where there's this really weird rite of passage. Well, that's how I learned it. Therefore, what I'm going to do is make them suffer the way I suffered. I had mandatory Saturday and Sunday hours. And so I've had lawyers go, well, I worked 100 hours a week and I did this and I did that and I did that. And I'm like, I understand, but you understand they're quitting, right? It's like they're breaking up with you. So your perception and what your expectations are not working. You're losing this game.
Well, and
So
self-awareness is so important also,
yeah,
because a lot of times we're not reflecting on, this was my failure in the onboarding process or in the way in which I brought them into this. They're not the right fit. It's a best case scenario. It's for the best. We're on to the next. Like, well, wait a minute.
yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, Lori, but this is important because a lot of audience members, I hope, are hearing this because what they'll say, and this is how they'll rationalize it: there are no good people out there. There's just no good people out there. There's just no good people out there. And you have to understand that you're really trying, if you're trying to grow your firm, what Lori's advocating, what Lori's arguing for, what Atticus is arguing for, is a shift in your thinking around your business skills. So this is the opportunity for you to invest in higher leadership skills, higher benefit a higher benefit to your team, your future team, and your current team. So don't let the past of, well, you don't understand how I was treated, get in the way. If anything, that should become fuel to the fire. Like, I'm never going to do to someone what was done to me as a stress. It was just terrible how I was treated as a young lawyer, just terrible. I didn't realize at the time because they know any better. That doesn't mean I should treat other lawyers that way or other team members that way. It's just terrible. So I'm sorry to kind of rant on that a little bit, but I'm trying to reach out to some of the audience members and gently shake them while they're driving their car or working on a treadmill to wake up. We're talking to you about this. So let's talk about strategy 6, because I think this is a critical one. It connects so powerfully to strategy 5.
Yeah, and that's really the delegation. Delegation has to be in the leadership tool belt that we are pulling from and utilizing because, again, this is one of the primary reasons onboarding, training, and nurturing the team is neglected is because it has to fall to one person or it has to fall to the person that everything else is already falling to. And it's just one more thing I have to do. And of the things I have to do, it's not the most important. I would argue that this is the most important work that you can do. To support your team. But if you are better suited in different areas of your practice and being the accountability partner, the mentor, or the manager of your team is not your best skill set or where your talents are best put for your business, then delegate this and seek out the additional staff acquisitions that you may need, or leverage the opportunity for your existing team to support onboarding, training, and implementation. And again, this is going to help with that more of a congealed feeling amongst the team members as well when they're working strategically together.
I'm going to put a plug in for the team leader certification program, and we're going to put it in the show notes, because most lawyers are terrible at what you're describing. And if you do not have a team leader, someone that can help you onboard, think about the key performance indicators, you're probably never going to scale beyond where you're at. And we've had 150 people graduate from the team leader certification process. Now, do all of them become team leaders? Nah. But the ones that do become team leaders have been remarkable. I think of Carrie Moss and her team lead, Billy Joe, at the presentation and the game changers they did last year. I think of some of the amazing things that Patty Paz and Christina Inman have done. So as you're thinking, oh my God, that's just another thing for me to do, I'm going to encourage you that what Lori's recommending is really thinking strategically about all delegation, not just the stuff on your desk, not whether you should be doing it or how you should be doing it, but who should be doing it inside your firm. Because without this critical element, I honestly don't think you're going to scale without this critical element, I don't think you're going to scale beyond 4 to 6 people. If you're lucky, maybe 10 to 12 if you're really a charismatic leader, but that's about it. That's where you're going to stop. And that's where a lot of law firms stop, Lori. They just stop there. So what you're arguing for is a significant shift in a business skill, a significant shift in thinking, and a significant investment in how to think about the growth of the firm. So it's very important. It's very, very important. Sorry, I don't mean you're hitting hot buttons for me. So
No, it is. And like I said, we don't give enough attention and thought to this. And, again, this is the constant frustration or constant toleration that so many of our firms are experiencing, but it requires the hard work up front.
and it sucks.
Leverage resources. I have supported a number of the individuals and firms that I work with in shaping and developing their onboarding process. So if you've got a coach or someone that can support you in this development to give you insight, oversight, I think that's a great resource. Again, what team members exist in your practice? How can you leverage AI? There are resources and things that can trim down the impact of this, but the most important thing is the acceptance of this is a non-negotiable. This is a strategic advantage for my business to take the time out and dedicate the development of this.
I agree. Um, I'm just going to say be careful with the AI, because I think a lot of the lawyers are being seduced with AI as a solution. And I don't think AI is a solution. It might help you organize, But the solution requires clarity of thought. You have to get your expectations clear. You have to start thinking about how you want your firm to operate, what your expectations are. And that requires you, quite frankly, and I've said this a whole bunch of times, requires you to slow down to speed up. You got to slow down, think about it. Yeah, excellent, Lori. So let's talk about strategy 7.
All right, strategy 7 is those specific metrics, right? We can't manage what we don't measure, right? So we need to be able to recognize how we are identifying success through metrics, things that we can actually measure. Otherwise, it becomes too ambiguous, too anecdotal, and it doesn't allow the individual to, again, kind of self manage and recognize whether or not they're on the right path. And this is where the a big frustration comes into, Steve. Where, well, what's a KPI? What's a key performance indicator? What metric? I don't know. So you probably have some expectations, whether or not they're specifically formulated, or there's metrics associated with it, is to be determined. But specific measurements, again, that we can look at. I mentioned earlier the conversion rate of engaging client, or consultation to engaging client, number of cases that they're managing, number of hours that they're billing, revenue that they're generating, client satisfaction survey results. I mean, there's a number of things you can incorporate into determining, is this individual being effectively utilized, and also are they doing so successfully.
Yeah, in a billable firm, did you make your numbers? Did you turn your bills in? Did you make your quota? What's your time on desk for certain projects? What's your turnaround? There's a lot of things that you can measure. The problem is with most lawyers is that these expectations are unstated. So I'm going to give a reference. I'm going to reference a prior episode I did with the amazing Glenn Finch. And we did a fantastic podcast. I should say he did a fantastic podcast on understanding there's 4 types of expectations. So I'm going to put that in the show notes as a reference. We use that for a conversation around the couples workshop, which we're doing this year, which I'm also going to put in the show notes. I think it's September 2025. But really getting clear on the expectations and where you get in trouble, and where I got in trouble and still get in trouble, is I have unmet, unstated expectations.
And you made that assumption. You assumed that your new hire should know those things. These should just
Yeah.
be organic pieces of knowledge they have.
Yeah. They should just psychically understand. And most of the time, the lawyers have unmet, unstated, uncommunicated, expectations that people are failing to meet. So this is where I say slow down to speed up. You got to get really clear. What are the key performance indicators that you're measuring and why? And if you're not sure, that's where you need to work with a coach. That's where you need to work with one of our practice advisors. If you're not in one of our group growth programs, get in one of our group growth programs. If you don't have a team leader, get a team leader. But you're wasting time and wasting money, and you're wasting other people's lives if you're messing around with this. Like, if you're messing around with this, I wouldn't treat this as a dress rehearsal. And I think the lawyers that take this seriously, regardless of their intellectual capabilities, whether they're board certified or graduate at the top of their class, they're the ones who take these business skills and get real with them and get in the trench with them. They're the ones that are kicking butt and taking names. They're the ones that the really smart lawyers are jealous of. And they're like, well, they're not that smart. They're not that good. Well, they're really good on the business side. They may not be really good. They can't draft as pretty as you can, but my God, they're crushing you on the customer service. They're crushing you on the onboarding. They're crushing you on the recruiting. And they're going to continue to crush you everywhere else because they're taking the business skills at a whole nother level. I guess I'm kind of cranky today. I'm not really sure what's going on. All right, keep going, Lori. What are your final recommendations? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, final thoughts, two. One is piggybacking off what you just said there, Steve. Again, this is typically not a natural role that our attorneys are taking on, which is leader and manager. And so you've got to lean into those, and you've got to recognize you are now in the people business completely. You already were there with clients, but if you're not focusing on the people, you're going to have not only all of the symptoms that Steve said, but also increased burnout, increased frustration, and decreased passion and satisfaction in your practice. The other final thought is just, recapping all of this. It really is an investment in your business. So you've got to invest in developing a structured onboarding process that's going to enhance your day-to-day operations. It's going to build a strong foundation, and it's going to lead to law firm growth. And then, final thought is this is not, again, a set it and forget it thing. We've got to be able to continue to evolve for ongoing growth for the business and for the dynamics of new team members that will come into the fold of your practice.
Great. So, any concluding remarks before I give them some concluding remarks of my own?
Just carve out the time. Again, this should be a non-negotiable for your business. If your intent truly is to scale and grow, you will need to do so by leveraging human resources.
All right. So, human resources is a fancy terminology for great people.
Correct.
Correct. So, it's a good corporate term for great people. Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. I would like you to consider 3 questions. Number 1, after listening to Lori, what's one way that you can improve your onboarding process in the next week? Like if you say, okay, I'm going to hire somebody, what's one way I can improve my onboarding process? And I would encourage you to probably invest 30 minutes to an hour to just trying to figure what that looks like. Number 2, what are the 3 most important key performance indicators that you'd like to measure for that person? Like what would you like to know that they're doing well at? And not subjective stuff like, oh, well, they like it here. Objective stuff like they're nailing the revenue numbers. And number 3, I want you to consider what would be available to you if you invested maybe 1 hour to 2 hours a month minimally to an ongoing training process with your existing team. Most of the interruptions that you're receiving, most of the challenges you're receiving, most of the breakdowns in client service and communications are not because you have bad people, it's because you have bad process. And bad process can only be fixed by training and examining why those processes are not working. Most of the lawyers I've coached and advised, Lori, I don't know how you feel about this, they're really good people and they've hired really good people. Most of what's killing them is bad process and no time to slow down and work on the bad process.
There's always going to be chaos. There's never a perfect time, right? That this is going to be the perpetuation of the feeling that you have in your business right now without this kind of on purpose attention.
I hope you don't hear Lori and I today scolding you if you're not doing a great job. We're trying to encourage you to, after a really bad onboarding experience, after dropping the ball, to say, okay, I don't want to do it like that again. And I want to make some improvements. And so Lori walked through really 7 strategies to help you improve your onboarding process. You may not get all 7 done in the next 7 days. You may only get 1 done in the next 7 months. But the fact that you're investing and progressing in your practice is really what these episodes are about. It's really what about a great practice and great life is about, because greatness is not free. It is a earned experience. A great practice is not given to you. It is earned. And this is where you earn it, in the trench, doing some of the hard work that Lori's talked about. Brilliant job today, Lori. Any last words for you?
I don't think so. What you just said is powerful stuff.
All right. With that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Go to work on that great practice, regardless of who you are. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please, please, please feel free to share it with other people. Share it with your team members. Do whatever you think is helpful to other people with this particular episode. And with that, thank you for being part of our great life and our great practice. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.